interesting. So hopefully the volume will be adequate. So I'll go ahead and just sort of play it for everyone. Let me know if you have trouble seeing. Actually, yeah.
Complex Regional Pain Syndrome, or CRPS, formerly known as Reflex Sympathetic Dystrophy, or RSD, is a chronic condition that causes persistent burning pain and swelling in your arms, hands, legs, or feet. Your body's normal response to an injury begins when pain receptors deliver pain messages in the form of nerve impulses to your brain. Once these impulses reach the pain centers in your brain, the pain centers generate new impulses and send them through your sympathetic nervous system to the area of injury. The sympathetic impulses trigger an inflammatory response, causing blood vessels to expand. The inflammatory response also leads to swelling and redness in the damaged tissue. As your wound heals, the swelling and redness subside and the pain goes away.
Did everyone hear it okay?
However, if you have complex regional pain syndrome, the pain and swelling do not go away after your wound heals and may worsen over time. Although the exact cause is unknown, one theory suggests that after your injury has healed, abnormal impulses continue to travel along nerves to your skin and blood vessels, stimulating the inflammatory response. There are two types of complex regional pain syndrome, though the symptoms are the same for both. If you have CRPS1, your condition may have been triggered by an illness or injury, but you do not have a nerve injury in the affected area. If you have CRPS2, your condition is clearly linked to a nerve injury in the affected area. Treatment of complex regional pain syndrome is focused on pain management, as there is no cure for this condition. Your treatment options may include pain medication, physical therapy, a nerve block, implantation of a pain-controlling device, surgery, and psychosocial support.
Yes. Actually, probably could have stopped it halfway through. Yeah, essentially that's it. So, I just thought it was an interesting animation to try to describe some things. Yeah, and there are others out there. If you search either on YouTube or other videos that are really interesting. Both animations that kind of show what's going on, as well as speakers that talk about either different treatments, different mechanisms that are thought of that could cause or contribute to RSD. I've actually downloaded quite a few of the videos. If anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share them. Some of them even from a couple of studies that I'll sort of talk about towards the end for research that's being done.
Is that site date on here somewhere?
I don't think so. I don't know if it is, actually.
I was looking for it, can't find it.
Does Nucleus Media have their own website, or is that, are they just YouTube? Or?
They probably have their own. I just usually would find their videos on YouTube. If you want the address for this. Yeah, it's Nucleus Medical Media. They're the ones, I mean, they have many different videos. I remember I used to watch their diabetes videos. I mean, yeah, quite a few of their metabolism videos, just to try to figure out what's happening in the process, because they're just really cool with their digital media stuff is really interesting. So you can do a search on them either on YouTube or Google or anything like that, and a lot will come up. But there are many different, also other companies that have animations as well out there. So this next bit of information is all theory. Like the information we were talking about before is somewhat theory, but this is all theory of what could be happening with RSD. Some of it is very complex, and so I don't even fully understand it, so I'm going to do my best to try to explain it. But it's very complex, and again, it's all theory. However, some of it does have more information out there than others. So, but at least I wanted to present it so that you know there is a lot of research out there that is happening to try to explain what happens with RSD, so you don't feel like it's a condition with no cure, it's a condition that doesn't have a cure now. However, there are people who are really trying to figure out what's happening so that at least better treatments, if not a cure, can be found in the future. Okay. So one mechanism is called central sensitization. That sort of means that our central nervous system itself is becoming more and more sensitized to a painful stimulus. When a nerve is both stimulated and injured, it becomes a lot more sensitive to stimuli, so that when it's stimulated again in the future, just a very minimal amount will stimulate it, as opposed to maybe it needed a much stronger stimulus in the past. A minimal one will affect it. And we've actually found that that although our central nervous system is what processes painful responses, that our peripheral nervous system actually starts to process the information even before it gets to our central nervous system. So there is actually what's called peripheral sensitization as well as central. And the reason I talked about glial nerve cells earlier is because the mechanism itself has a little bit to do with, or actually quite a bit to do with glial cells. So like I was saying earlier, with glial cells versus neurons, neurons comprise about 10% of our nervous system. Glial cells are 90%, so they make up most of our nervous system. There are quite a few different types of glial cells. There are ones that are just immune-type glial cells. There are ones that are just supportive, that just nourish our neurons. There are ones that, have you ever heard of myelin, which is what sheathes our central nervous system and peripheral nervous system cells? They're glial cells that just make up the myelin to help keep them insulated, kind of like the wires that we have for our electricity. Myelin's kind of like the covering on our nerve cells, and so there are glial cells that just make up the myelin. That's their only duty. And so there are many different functions of them, which is why they comprise about 90% of our nervous system itself. And there's ones that, those ones that are part of the immune system, they release different chemical mediators that are part of inflammation. Some of them are pro-inflammatory, meaning that they stimulate an inflammatory response, or anti-inflammatory, they help more with the healing response. So what will usually happen is, let's say there's some sort of nerve injury. A glial cell will release a mediator of some sort, either pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, to deal with whatever's happening and to help with the healing process. It may initially be pro-inflammatory if, let's say, there's a bacterium that's attacking our neurons, and it knows that we need to kill that bacterium before we can heal, and so it'll release a pro-inflammatory cytokine, which means like a chemical mediator to kill it. And it'll then be done with. It can release the anti-inflammatory ones, and then we can heal. However, unfortunately, in CRPS or in RSD, what we think is happening is that too many pro-inflammatory mediators are being released, and so our nerves are in constant state of inflammation. And because there's that excessive amount that's being released, we can't deal with it all at once, and it continues to injure our nerves and continues to have that inflammatory response, and then our nerves are just stuck being inflamed. And so one theory is that maybe we can find a way to stimulate our glial cells to release anti-inflammatory mediators and stop that response from happening. Unfortunately, we haven't found a safe way to do it yet, because we have no inflammation happening. And again, we wouldn't be able to kill the bacterium or viruses or anything else that are killing or that are attacking our nerve cells. So there has to be an appropriate balance, but unfortunately with RSD, it's too much of the inflammation is happening. And then another mechanism that I found, glutamate's one of our neurotransmitters that we have, and it attaches to NMDA receptors, or what they're called, they're N-methyl deaspartate. And essentially it's just saying that we have too much glutamate that's within our nervous system is what we think is happening with RSD. Glutamate's pretty much a stimulatory neurotransmitter, and so we think there's too much that's there and too much stimulating our nervous system, and then we can't figure out how to turn it off with, again, like a safe balance of both glutamate and then an anti-glutamate, essentially, neurotransmitter. So yeah, I think I just put this in there as another cartoon to just kind of show what's happening with the inflammatory response with different neurotransmitters and hormones that are being released when we're having either some sort of pain or some sort of inflammation that's happening. Sorry, I made this presentation up about a month ago, actually, because I was so busy. I knew I had to have it done before then. And then, yeah, this is just another example of that same thing of the central and peripheral sensitization when there's some sort of either inflammatory or painful response happening, and then it's sent from our peripheral to our central nervous system and then back down to our peripheral, and these are just some of the neurotransmitters and hormones that are coming into play. Yeah, like glutamate with NMDA, like I said, is one of them. And this sort of goes along with what I was saying about with the glial cells and too much information. There'll be some sort of trauma that elicits, or trauma to a nerve fiber that elicits some sort of injury, elicits the release of certain either inflammatory mediators, peptides, just different things that cause different effects within our bodies. Some of the different ones, you may have heard of substance P before, which essentially, I like to think of it as substance pain for substance P because it's one of the ones that really mediates our pain, receptors that when it binds. So what we're thinking is that there's too much, when the nerve injury happens, there's too much substance P that's being released, binding to its receptors and stimulating a response, and then we don't know how to turn it off yet. But we think it's either due to continued stimulation of those nerves, too much inflammation itself that's happening. Unfortunately, we don't know the initial mechanism and why it's continuing, but we're learning more and more about the neurotransmitters, peptides, and things like that are being released.
Dave, I got a question. I remember reading years ago that one of the problems with RSD was there was an overdose of white blood cells to the area. Is that still true? Is that not true? Or?
I would say somewhat.
I remember they even had a test developed for it.
I would say it somewhat is. We actually, with the inflammatory neurons that I was saying early on, some of those are actually considered white blood cells, or they sort of go back and forth with the blood cells. Having too much of blood cells is not necessarily true, but it's more of the response that the blood cells do that is the problem. Because they release many different kinds of chemicals as well as the glial cells and many other cells in our bodies. And so when they're releasing too much, that's more the problem than having too much of the cells themselves, I guess, is a better way of saying it. And we don't know how to stop them from releasing those mediators. I don't know, is that somewhat?
Yeah,
answer? Yeah, so I think I just put this in here for showing pro-inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory markers that we have that are specifically found in CRPS, either having too much or too little of them. I think I should have said as well that, yeah, we may have too many of these once more on the left, or too much release of them, but then we also may have too little release of the anti-inflammatory ones is also another thing that we think is happening. So yeah, this is just another cartoon that I found of what we think is happening with the injury and mediated release of the chemicals and then just the continued response of it. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But I think I actually found this one in particular from the RSDCareShare's website. So I just found it kind of interesting. So this has another theory about oxidants versus antioxidants, and we always hear about, oh, you want to have your blueberries or your blackberries or